God woke me up at 4 o'clock in the morning on December 15th, 2017 and said, hey, go to your study. I've got something to tell you. And I'm like, that doesn't happen. That's not a normal thing for me. And he said, I want you to put a pool of funds together, call it the Kingdom Giving Fund. And I want you to fund in 3 categories: Christian witness, alleviate human suffering, and encourage human flourishing. And then the line went dead.
The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership between 1615 and Missio Nexus, who have a shared passion to mobilize the people of God to be a part of His mission.
Well, hello and welcome once again to the podcast, The Mission Matters. I am Matthew Ellison, and I'm joined by my very good friend and co-host, Ted Essler. Ted, I'm sorry about your Vikings.
I know, it was a rough one. It's going to be a rough season, but you got a rookie quarterback. You got to expect a few bumps in the road.
That's right. Well, I'm looking forward to today's conversation. Ted, why don't you introduce our guest?
All right. Well, today we have I think it's going to be a very interesting session with Al Mueller, who's the president and founder of Excellence in Giving, a ministry that I have known about for many years. And Al, I can hardly believe that you and I have never personally met before. But it's going to be really fun hearing a little bit about you. Let's start by, if you could just tell us a little bit of your story and how Excellence in Giving came to be. I think that would really help listeners kind of get grounded here at the beginning of the conversation.
Okay. Well, I started a journey after grad school. I went from UCLA Business School to New York City to work for Morgan Stanley in New York City and Chicago, and both in New York and Chicago. Was with them for 15 years, and then went over to UBS, and we had an idea to serve CEOs that had at least $100 million of net worth and usually concentrated in their company stock. And as I did that, I really enjoyed it. I was working for a friend of mine from business school, and I started asking the question, if I help a person with $100 million make another $5 million, does that really change their life? And I thought the answer had to be honestly no. But I started thinking, if I could help this person with $100 million give away $5 million, could that change their life? And certainly could change the life of the recipients. And so the follow-on question was, well, who is out there doing that without a conflict of interest? So even if you go to your local pastor and say, Pastor, I've got some extra money, you'd probably have a wonderful new parking lot in your future at the church or some other project, but he has a conflict of interest. And so I started looking around, and people of high net worth, their choices were either to do it themselves, and ultra high net worth people are not in the do-it-yourself market. Their other alternative was to hire some people from church or some other thing and let them kind of learn on their dime. But that is one more thing to manage, and plus it's pretty expensive option. So what we saw people doing was using a default option to put money in a vehicle, a donor advised fund, community foundation, private foundation, whatever. And then someday when they retire from their business activities, become a philanthropist. And so we said, those are not really good choices. And so we tried to build a different model, which was Excellence in Giving.
Well, I've seen a lot of money getting poured into donor advised funds. Yeah, I mean, I don't know how much is out there right now. Do you have any idea how much money is tied up in donor advised funds currently?
Well, I think the easy answer is too much, but yeah. And we would, our thing is to, we want to see current gifts made. And just about a month ago, we saw a number that since inception, since the beginning of Excellence in Giving in 2002, our clients, and we would be very conservative in our counting of that, only people that have retained us on an annual basis, not projects and things like that. But it went over $1 billion. It was $1.065 billion of money that had actually left our clients and gone to operating charities. And so
That's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty amazing. Yeah.
That's amazing. Al, I think it'd be helpful for our listening audience to know how EIG operates, how you serve your clients, but then also how you work with organizations and you facilitate connections. Could you just frame for us how EIG works?
Yeah. Well, it's a unique model. I mean, essentially, we're a foundation staff for right now about 35 families. The total annual giving is about $100 million per year. But instead of each foundation or each family having their own foundation staff, they use Excellence in Giving, our research team, our client service team, and their giving advisors. So one person, when we heard about our model, he said, "You guys are kind of like the net jets of philanthropy. Some people have their own planes, but sometimes people just have a fractional share or take different hours of a plane." So our clients basically do that. They take some of our time and our expertise for their family giving. So we conduct a lot of research, a lot of due diligence, and 2 to 4 meetings per year with each family, and try to really get them actively engaged in their giving. With them, they don't outsource it to us. I mean, we play a pretty vital role with the family, but we want to take them on site visits. We want to have them experience. I think one way we typically operate would be, think about turning the cards on the table face up, and then they and the Holy Spirit can decide how to play them. But we feel like a great donor relationship for the donor and the ministry they support is one that's transparent and accountable. So we try to get as much information as possible before our clients make the gift. And on the backside of that, we try to get a lot of information on how the money was used, because we think that the way the flywheel keeps turning is that they have a celebration. If you celebrate something, you want to do it again. And so I think we really work hard from the ministry standpoint to ask them to get, feature-rich reports back to the people who support them in the form of a video or really just a high-quality report that allows the family to celebrate.
So you've had exposure to a lot of significant donors. I'd be curious, what are the key factors that kingdom investors prioritize as they're looking at giving?
Well, at the risk of sounding simplistic, the main thing they want to see is something that works. And they want to see, some demonstration and some measurement of that. So a lot of times we'll see, kind of take a before picture of what's happening, but with the ministry, and then after the ministry. I mean, a lot of our client funding is project specific rather than just general operations. But they would like to see, things expand, things improve. So it's. I think this generation is definitely becoming more and more results oriented.
Are you seeing a shift in the age of donors?
Well, we've been doing this for 22 years, and some of our clients started out in their 50s and 60s, and now are in their 70s and 80s. But we definitely work with their children, which are in their 20s, 30s, and 40s. So yeah, I think people are not giving out of just obligation or feeling like it's something that they are supposed to be doing or trying to make a social impact. A social statement. But I think that they're saying we want to make life change for people. And so I think that's going on. And there's somewhat of a shift. I think the previous generation felt a little more duty or obligation than this generation.
So, Al, building on Ted's question there, I'm curious, beyond financial contributions, when you're interacting with your clients, these investors, what do they view as success? You talked about the celebration stories, et cetera, but what do they view as effective philanthropy?
Well, I think there's two options. One would be going and attacking the root cause of a problem and trying to diminish, the problem itself. And then there's ways to help people that are victims of a problem. And so, some people lean one side or the other on that, but it's, is it preventing homelessness or helping the person who's homeless have a better quality of life, meals, medical care, et cetera? So I think people look at it on both sides of that, and again, it's reasons to do that. I mean, the old saying is, do you keep pulling people out of the river, or do you go upstream and build a fence so people don't fall in the river? And the answer is probably both. So,
do you have many donors? I mean, a lot of what we've talked about so far, it sounds like social projects, social change. And our audience is very much motivated spiritually.
right.
Do you have many donors that are like really aware of evangelism, discipleship, and planting churches as a primary outcome, or is it do you see much more emphasis on social action?
Oh no, no. Our clients they're all families of faith to a varying degree. So they would be kingdom minded people for sure. One of our favorite ministries that we have documented results on is Awana, and
I love it. Love
I
it.
think that they've been very, very active, and I think they've reframed it and calling it, instead of youth ministry, a child discipleship ministry. And when we studied 1,000 of their alumni, we broke it into people that have been in Awana for 5 years or less, or more than 5 years. And the people that were in Awana for 5 years or more, today, 80% of those were not just in church, but in church leadership. And so to me, if you hear people lament that children are walking away at college and post college from their faith, I would ask the question, how well were they discipled as children? And I think if they were well discipled as children, I mean, I can't say, I don't want to say it can't happen that they walk away from their faith, but it's far less likely.
Al, that really resonates with me for a couple of reasons. But I was a church planner in Bosnia, and we were all about working with adults. And when you do church planning, you work with adults. You try to get the leader of the household, right, and they bring their family. That's kind of the thinking. After I left and came back after just a few short years, all those teenagers that we didn't spend any time with were the central figures in that church plant.
Mm.
And it really was stunning to me how quickly young people got engaged in leadership and kind of took over the work. So I love that story of Awana, and I feel like it really resonates with my background too.
Well, and there's a lot of great things happening on college campuses. I mean, I think we're all sad, very sad, and the tragic death of Charlie Kirk last week. But there was a revival on college campuses. I mean, not just the Asbury, revival, but I mean, you see groups like Unite Us. I mean, and certain college football teams. The national champion last year, Ohio State. Their motto was Team Jesus. And having the students baptize other students, and I mean the colleges. There's some tough things happening on college campuses, but there's also some amazing rallies and reawakening of faith and all kinds of things going on. There's a lot of hope in this next generation. So,
amen. I agree.
So Al, I'm curious. We talk about measuring activity, outcomes, things like that. And I know sometimes when you measure church planting, in particular among unreached people groups, it can be a tough measurement because oftentimes you're talking about a Muslim context, you're talking about hard ground. And so I'm wondering how you balance helping your clients, these investors, understand, again, you're looking for activity and outcome, but there's a supernatural component of what happens in all ministry, but especially when you're penetrating the frontier with the gospel. So I'm just curious if you can talk about what that balance looks like.
Yeah, I think you have to look at the field that you're sowing in, and as whether it's church planting, or even reaching hard to reach youth. I mean, in the United States, is the intervention appropriate for the situation? And so, is it going to take 10 years to reach a small number of people in a Muslim context? Absolutely. Is that a good investment? For the person who wants to do that, absolutely. But if someone says, I am more interested in trying to find, the Henry Blackaby things where God's at work and pour more fuel on those fires, that might be the donor's interest. But I think that when somebody's planting in a difficult soil, difficult environment, then I think you look at the faithfulness and how long it takes. I mean, I do think that most people underestimate how long it takes to make impact. Most people would know Tim Keller's name. We moved to New York in 1984, and Tim Keller was not a factor in New York City for 10 years. Until 1994 or later, he was just another guy who just happened to show up on the scene there. So it takes a long time to, there's some stories about the 10,000 hours it takes to become an expert. But I think there's a lot of time that it takes 10 years um, to see a successful church plant or a successful. We're helping a family right now buy a building for a church in Paris, and this guy's been there 16 years, and I think he's been in 9 different locations, but he's got a 400 or 500 member congregation now, which is a mega church in Paris for sure. And he needs a building, but a lot of times I think groups like Tim Keller's City to City, they think they can start an instant, mothership in a city, and I think you have to consider it's going to take those 10 years to really establish credibility and to build the network and to build the foundation. And I remember a friend of ours when with Excellence in Giving was taking a long time to get going. He said, "You were in Chicago, right?" I said, "Yeah." He goes, "How long when those skyscrapers are getting built? How long do they work on the foundation?" And the answer was sometimes for years they would work on a foundation. And he said, "Yeah, because the foundation, the amount of work it takes on the foundation is directly proportional to this height of the building." And so I think you have to look at each situation and try to put it in context. And I think part of that is making sure that you've level set the expectation of a donor. If you say to a donor, "We're going to plant in a Muslim context and it's going to be hard and it's going to have less fruit in the beginning," I think the donor can understand that and appreciate it. So, but I think the misexpectation is, oh, he's going to plant a church and it's going to have hundreds or thousands of people in it in the first couple of years. Then there's just that missed expectation. So I think it's important to work in difficult, vineyards and different fields, but just manage the donor's expectation.
Yeah, I mean, I couldn't agree more. I would actually say, the command is to disciple the nations. And we got to be looking at this as multi-generational, even 10 years, maybe to plant a church. But again, that's just a stepping stone on the way if you're going to reach an unreached people group. So I think you're right about that. I know you guys have been involved with collaborative giving.
Mm-hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit about what that looks like at Excellence in Giving and what the impact of, and why a donor would prefer collaborative over just giving a gift thinking they're going to have some direct impact?
Yeah, I think there's been some good attempts at that. I wasn't planning on that, but God woke me up at 4:00 in the morning on December 15th, 2017 and said, "Hey, go to your study. I've got something to tell you." And I'm like, that doesn't happen. That's not a normal thing for me. And I had a choice between rolling over and just ignoring it or getting up. And I got up and got my iPad out. And he said, "I want you to put a pool of funds together, call it the Kingdom Giving Fund. And I want you to fund in 3 categories: Christian witness, alleviate human suffering, and encourage human flourishing." And then the line went dead. And I thought, wow, I've got the what. I have no idea the how or the who, but what's next? And a week later, I was in Houston with one of our clients and I had a big long meeting because we're talking about helping out after Hurricane Harvey and some of the disaster funding. And I laid it out just like that. And he said right away, "I'll be your first investor. I'll be the chair of your investment committee, and I'll help you raise the capital." I didn't know I was going to have an investment committee, but I know this guy had raised $10 billion for private equity and energy. So I had no doubt that he could, and he was going to be the first investor. So the first fund we did in that regard was a $30 million fund. We've had $5 million as the buy-in to have a seat at the table to make the decisions. So there were 4 families that sat on the investment committee. Excellence in Giving would find ideas, do the due diligence, present them to the investment committee. They would approve them. And once they were approved, then we would call the capital down from the different families on a pro rata basis. And we did about 50-50 domestic and international. And the fund lasted 3 years and monitored the results for 2 more. And we met at the midpoint or actually towards the end of the investment period, we launched a second fund, Kingdom Giving Fund 2, which was $42 million with 15 families and did the same thing. So in total, we made 18 gifts of between $1 and $4 million to accelerate ministries. We felt like the problem we were solving is there wasn't a single one-stop shop for capital. If a ministry had $1 million idea, they probably had to go to 20 different foundations, have a 50% batting average and get $100,000 or $50,000 from each fund. It's a very, very inefficient capital raise compared to the investment markets. So
I want to build on this just a little bit. You talk, Al, about the way the Holy Spirit's moving on college campuses among young people. One of the things that I'm seeing is a movement of the Holy Spirit among churches who are coming together, different in denomination, different in tradition, but they're coming together for the sake of reaching the unreached. I worked in Roanoke a couple of years ago with the church, and to make a long story very short, what we got invited into is something called the Roanoke Area Bible Translation Coalition. It's 8 different churches. Again, fundamentally, they're on the same page. The essentials, they're there, but the non-essentials, they're very, very different. Charismatic, Reformed, but they've set those differences aside and they're engaging the Baker people of Southeast Asia. That's not their real name, of course. And it's been remarkable to see what God is doing. And then we're involved in something in Phoenix right now, very similar. There's a group of churches. There's about 5 organizations, and they're collectively coming together to engage the Bengalis, the largest unreached people group on planet Earth. And they're setting up a donor advised fund, a ministry advised fund. And several organizations are going to be beneficiaries of some of this generosity. What's amazing is there's been some kingdom-minded investors in Phoenix that have stepped up, and they want to remain anonymous, no surprise.
Yeah.
But they're giving impact money like challenge grant, like, hey, for the churches that come together to do this, we will do a match. And so I just want to make that comment. There's a lot to lament in our country today. There's a lot to lament in the church. But I also see something beautiful happening. And when I was working with the folks in Roanoke, I said to them at one of the meetings where they were planning some strategic initiatives, I said, you know what this group of churches represents? It's the answer to an ancient prayer, a prayer prayed by Jesus in John 17. May they be one as you and I are one, that the world may know. And I see that prayer being answered today in many contexts. I'm thrilled.
Yeah. Well, I think that a lot of the student work is a combination of, quite a number of student, college ministries coming together and working collaboratively on the college campuses. So it's exciting when churches work together. There's been initiatives. A group called Love Has No Limits has done a big thing in Houston. I think they were a big deal in Los Angeles during COVID. But it's bringing churches that want to work together, want to look at the city's problems, and I think I would say that whether it's our Kingdom Giving Fund or any other collaborative giving, it's really essential to have a research base. I think that if you're just if you're a giving circle and it's just a bunch of different people with different ideas, you're kind of all pulling on a rope in different directions to give money. But if you could say, hey, the research tells us these are the problems and these are the solutions, and then let's figure out a way to fund them together and work together and invest our time as well as our money. That's a great model. So,
talk to us a little bit about the balance that needs to be had between trusting recipients of funds versus holding them accountable. I would think that would be a difficult tightrope to walk at times.
Well, I don't know. I don't think there's a reason necessarily to do sort of blind trust. I think that ministries probably should do a better job of planning and telling the donor on the front end what they're going to do with the money and how they're going to do it. Because I think there have been organizations that have said, you can just trust me because of some, past experience or success or whatever. But I think that, there's definitely an element that says you need to have an executable plan. And without an executable plan, I don't think a donor should get involved, to be honest with you. I mean, I look at this and say, if you're not going to, I think it's just, counting the cost to build a building. I mean, I don't want to give any specific. There's a big initiative right now. And I said, what you're telling people is they should give you money because you're going to build a skyscraper, but you haven't hired an architect to do that, to draft the blueprints. And I said, that doesn't make any sense to me. You need to have somebody draft the blueprints so you can go out and get the bids from the contractors to tell you how much it's going to take, cost, and how long it's going to take, et cetera, et cetera. But I think ministry leaders are often long on vision and execution. They just kind of say, well, it'll happen, and I don't think that's accurate. I think that I want to get, again, I won't tell you which ministry, but a ministry leader came to me one time and he said, Al, if we had $1.3 billion, we could fulfill the Great Commission. And I just said, okay, well, I'll bite. I said, so what's your plan to deploy the first 100 million? And he said, I don't have one. And I said, well, you know what? Down the road at the university, they've got a plan for 100 million. Down the road at the hospital, they've got a plan for 100 million. So we had one client at the time, it was worth about $9 billion. He could have written a $100 million check. But I said, he's not going to ever write a check to your organization because you don't have a plan. So I think it's really, kind of, I think it's Steve Case's quote that a dream without a plan is just a hallucination. And so I don't think we give to ministry hallucinations. And I think that, trust comes from a variety of things, but having a good plan is definitely one way to build trust. So, and I think there's a difference. I don't think the donors don't want to micromanage something. I think ministry leaders sometimes get confused between what a donor wants information versus control. And I think a healthy donor relationship is information driven, not control driven.
So Al, one more question from me, and I'll let Ted wrap up with the final question. But so you vet these organizations, you evaluate them on behalf of your clients. And so there's some real benefit that comes to these organizations when they have an EIG recommendation or seal of approval. Can you talk about that? Because I think a lot of our listening audience, they are missions organizations, and it would be beneficial for them to have that type of endorsement. So what does that look like?
Yeah, we have a database that we use with our clients. It's about 750 organizations, and it's usually based on either a past giving or a prospective giving by a client. And so, but ministries, if they want to get into our database, they can self-identify and ask us to get them added to that. When they're in that, they get a seal. It says there's a commitment by that ministry to transparency. We don't rate them with stars or numbers, or I think those are kind of goofy, and I'm not a fan of the quote unquote ratings of ministries. But I feel, like you said, just finished that the TART was about a great ministry relationship between a donor and a ministry is based on transparency and accountability. And so if for us, our clients, we're not just looking for ministries that want to find the donor's ATM code and press it and get money. We're interested in that relationship, but it's transparent and accountable. So we think, there's things on there that indicate ministry's health, ministry's growth, things like, what is their donor retention rate? These are things that are not necessarily on the 990 that they file. And again, part of it these days, a lot of ministries have, become church status legal. They've filed with the IRS to become legally a church, so they don't have to even file the 990 anymore. Some of them prepare it, but groups that you wouldn't think. Compassion International, Focus on the Family, Biblica, a lot of groups are actually registered with the IRS now as churches. So, but they still fill out our form, and our clients still have access to that information. But we look at things like staff turnover as an indication of organizational health. We look at donor retention as an organizational health indicator, use of volunteers, a lot of things that aren't on a traditional 990. And it's also very current because we ask them for an update 3 months after their fiscal year end, and then it includes this year's budget. So GuideStar, Charity Navigator, those sort of things, since they're using IRS data, it's usually about 2 years old compared to ours.
So you mentioned a website. Tell us how listeners, if they're interested, could get a little bit more information about Excellence in Giving?
Yeah. Well, it's www.excellenceingiving.com. And, the database itself is for subscribers, but there are kind of snippets or executive summary level things on the different ministries in there. And that's available to donors without any charge. But Excellence in Giving has a lot of samples and examples. We also do a monthly e-newsletter that goes out to, excuse me, goes out to about 5,000 people. So if people want to get, in some of the current topics in Christian philanthropy, we try to, have a variety of articles each month that's, again, free of charge, and happy to have people subscribe to that. So.
Great. Well, our guest has been Al Mueller with Excellence in Giving, and it's very encouraging to hear about the generosity that's going on. I do think you're right. I think we're in a cultural moment where we could potentially see generosity as just a fallout of all that's happening in the broader. It feels like a revival maybe at the beginning stages, but we'll see what happens. But I do think generosity will probably increase.
I think it will. I think that, we would focus on stewardship. And I think that if people, if you're generous, I think that you can even upgrade beyond that to the level of a steward, a wise and discerning steward. So I think that the steward is one who will do a little more homework. I mean, a generous person is willing to live, open-handedly, and that's awesome. But I think the person, we would say that our clients are interested in making a difference, not just a donation. And I think that there's a little higher level of due diligence and to be a steward, to be a wise steward, because the person who was hired, the steward in the New Testament, that was you're in charge of the field, the finances, and the family, and those stewards were chosen very, very carefully, and it was a high calling. So I think if you're looking to be a steward for God's resources, I think it's also a high calling, and that it'll take a little extra work to discern where He wants discern where He wants His resources to go, and He'll continue to flow them through you. So,
well, thank you, Al. It's been a real pleasure being with you today.
Well, thanks for having me, Matthew and Ted. Nice to be with you.
Before you go, be sure to like, share, and subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. The Mission Matters podcast is a partnership of 1615 and Missio Nexus. Check out 1615.org and missionexus.org for more resources on the mission of God and the matters of the mission. The Mission Matters podcast is hosted by Matthew Ellison, president of 1615, and Ted Essler, president of Missio Nexus.